Yeah, so that was my friend that I lived with out in DC. She and I had met at Ohio State, and she ran political campaigns in college. And she was like, "We can come back there. We can do this." Like, and at first I said no. I was like, "There's no way that we're going to get any sort of traction with this." And I got to thinking about it a little bit later, and I was like, "All right, let's just try it." So she flew out, and we basically kind of ran it like a political campaign, getting volunteers. I mean, I've got all of the paperwork from it still down in my basement, all of the donations, like all of that. It was just her and I on my back porch, my parents' back porch, coming up with different ideas of what to do the next day. So, getting the sheets and putting them on the fraternity houses and the sorority houses on 15th. And we spray painted those. Getting, the AEP was great. As many flyers as we wanted. They just kept printing them off. It was amazing. So, and then just getting volunteers to come down. We would be in the sorority house, and people would come in. I knew her. What can I do to help? And we had, grids and sections of where we were, having people put up flyers and stuff like that. I was limited in how long I could stay. I was actually speaking at a client conference like a couple of days after we did the vigil, so I had to go back to Maryland. I did, what I could from there. Definitely people were still hanging up flyers and doing vigils and things like that. But at some point, it kind of, I hate to say it died down. And, it just got to the point where we needed to pivot.
Law enforcement, along with Stacey's family and friends, would continue to search for Stacey and answers to what could have happened in the early morning hours of March 22nd of 1998.
AEP was great. I remember just going down to AEP to pick up the flyers. They donated like boxes upon boxes upon boxes upon boxes of flyers. And we mobilized the team. Ashley was amazing during this whole thing. And Ashley and her friend really took the lead on trying to get organized and deploy and just really try to find, how do you take action when you're grieving and upset? And so we just being out there, hanging flyers, canvassing the Ohio State campus, going to parking lots, putting it on every single car that I could see. It was surreal, just seeing one of my best friend's pictures, and you're just hanging it up on posts, putting it on cars, and just seeing thousands of pictures of Stacey everywhere, just praying, hoping that someone just saw something, heard something, just felt like something was not right about a particular situation, and just praying to God that someone would call in to give the police whatever little piece of information that they were looking for to be able to take action on this situation. I was shocked that no one was arrested. I wasn't aware of anybody being pulled in for questioning. I don't know. It was just awful.
There are more questions than answers.
Yeah, parking tickets over the life of someone, I struggle with that.
Now on Just In Case You Forgot.
Just In Case You Forgot podcast is produced and hosted by William Swafford. Music was put together by William Swafford.
Yes, we did. We did flyers. AEP was printing off just tens of thousands of flyers every day and delivering them to the sorority house. The sorority house kind of became our central place to meet. Most of the girls were on spring break still. And so the woman, I think one of the alumni in the area, she had a key to the house and let us in. And so we kind of used that as our central hub, and we were distributing flyers. We were talking to the media. There were candlelight vigils. I remember, I think she was a state representative, Amy Salerno, came and spoke at one of them very graciously. We covered Columbus in flyers.
The Alpha Delta Pi sorority sisters would do their part to help the search for Stacey Colbert. They would cover the Ohio State campus and the city of Columbus with flyers, asking for information about what could have happened to their friend.
I did a little bit. So by the time I got back to Ohio from Texas, there was a lot of media coverage going on of her disappearance, and one of our friends was organizing the flyer distribution. So the flyers were already put together, and I just had to get some from her and hand them out. And it's very hard for me to remember the details of that time. I feel like I just was in kind of in shock. I can hardly remember the vigil that we had at Ohio State.
3 different detectives would be on the Stacey Colbert investigation in Columbus, Ohio. 2 of those detectives were husband and wife. When I first heard that, I wondered if 2 detectives that were married and working on the same investigation would cause any problems within the investigation, or their home lives for that matter. One of the detectives stated that they were looking within the circle of Stacey's friends. They were sure that it had to be someone Stacey had known. There was also a statement that they were receiving tips from psychics. However, nothing sparked any new leads. Detectives were withholding some details of their investigation with hopes to identify the person responsible. So what do we know so far of their investigation? On March 21st, Stacey had talked to her dad at some point in the evening on the phone. She was getting ready for a business trip. Law enforcement had talked to a pizza delivery person who made a delivery to Stacey's apartment around 6 in the evening. They had talked to a neighbor who said he heard screams and loud banging during the early morning hours, and he had gone and checked on Stacey around 2 in the afternoon by knocking on her door and received no answer. A few days later, that neighbor changed his story and said that he heard sounds of a sexual nature. That man said that he didn't want to get involved because he had unpaid parking tickets and he didn't want to talk to law enforcement.
Yeah, parking tickets over the life of someone, I struggle with that.
Stacey's car and things were at the apartment. The apartment door was not fully shut. Stacey had not reported to work. There was a leak to the media about a piece of blood-stained carpet that was taken out of the apartment. Now, the evening of March 20th, which would have been a Friday, Stacey had gone out to a place called Arlington Cafe with a group of people mostly made up of her co-workers from AEP. That night had come up in a conversation with Paula.
Those last 6 months of her life, even though I had kind of gotten a little disconnected, some of the other girls were, but we didn't just live a block apart anymore. We didn't see each other every day.
Yeah.
So there were new people in her life we didn't know. And so I've always wondered secretly was it somebody that she worked with? And that's why I've always wanted to know who took her home that Friday night. Maybe that's, and I'd always assumed it was someone maybe that she worked with that had helped her move in.
That Friday night came up again in the same conversation.
I know, my theory is I want to know who took her home that Friday night. So she had gotten, because she's Stacey, she gets close to everybody. And even though she hadn't been working at AEP for very long, she'd gotten really close with her work friends there. And they went out Friday night to Arlington Cafe, which was on, I think, Henderson Road, maybe back in the day. I never went there. I just heard about it. Sounds like a place where you eat, but it was really a bar. And so she was there, and all I know about that night is that she had a close friend from work I think she went there with Wendy. I think Wendy drove her there, and Wendy was supposed to, as far as I understand, drive her home, but she did something to piss off Wendy, and Stacey was not a perfect human being. She had her stuff just like the rest of us, and I don't know any of the details. I've been trying to find Wendy and I've had no luck. We don't even have a last name. It's been 25 years, but Wendy got mad and left without Stacey. And all we know about how she got home that night, and it's just from the police, is that a male acquaintance took her home. We don't know who that was. That he didn't stay for long, maybe 30 minutes, and then he left. But that's always been a huge question mark for me. Like, who was it? And was it someone that she worked with, and then maybe he had a thing for her and he knew she lived alone, because if he took her home, and how that apartment, like, there's no way to see out of the front door. Like, if this was some kind of psycho creeper that just seemed like a harmless person, I don't know. I've always wondered who took her home that night, but I've never been able to get an answer to that. I'm sure that's a highly sensitive part of the investigation. That's probably why I've never been able to get that answer, but I've always wondered who took her home that night.
I believe that some names were kept from people, and I also believe that some names have been forgotten. Since I've started gathering information for this podcast, I've been seeing things about two men who were interviewed by police. However, the two got lawyers and then refused to talk. The names of these two men remains a mystery to me. Sometimes when people hear of someone getting a lawyer when being questioned by law enforcement, we tend to think that it means that a person has something to hide. I will include myself in on that. However, sometimes the person could be innocent and doesn't want to go through the intense questioning by law enforcement. I asked Danielle, Stacey's sister, what she knew of the two men who decided to get lawyers when they were being questioned by detectives.
I think one of the ones that lawyered up was the one I was talking about. I don't have the name.
Danielle is referring to the guy who helped Stacey move into the apartment at Governor Square that she mentioned in episode 3.
The Governor Square, she had this one friend. So I didn't really know him very well. That was when I met him, because I, of course, with moving, I was helping too. Yeah. Whatever she did, I was helping,
A person getting a lawyer and also not wanting to talk to a family member of a victim doesn't sit right with me or most people.
He was in her phone book. I don't still have that. I think I had to turn that in for evidence when they came. But before it was determined a homicide, I was going through all of her friends, and he actually refused to take my call. Sorry, it's been 25 years, but it was the craziest reaction to someone who nothing had been public to refuse to, even his roommates got on there and it's like, leave my friend alone, quit calling. I'm like, I just wanted to know if you saw her. You just helped her move. What's going on? It was just odd reaction. I mean, I know people laugh at funerals and things like that and have odd reactions, but I don't know.
This is what Ashley had to say when I brought up the two men who got lawyers.
They're hiding behind lawyers. There's also only so much that the police can do. Exactly it. My friend was dating a DC cop at the time, and he was like, those are considered guilty acts. Yeah, and there were people that initially talked to the police and then didn't.
This is Paula's thoughts on the two men.
I know from the one newspaper article that we found as we were combing back over everything last fall, there's one of them that actually has a picture of my husband and I and Ashley taking Stacey's couch out of her apartment. And that article says that there were two men, they just referred to them as like acquaintances of Stacey's or something to that effect, who wouldn't cooperate. I know who one of them was. I don't know who the other one was, but I know one of them either lived in her complex or somewhere nearby, because they were certain, like it was him. They were dead certain he was the guy. They put so much pressure on this man. They really wanted to just pin it on him and clean up the case and move on. And he cooperated with them to a point, but once I think he realized they were going to try to blame this on him, he lawyered up and he stopped cooperating. And I know Stacey's current detective has tried to reach out to him, but because of what he went through, the trauma of that, he won't talk to Detective Bessinger at all. And that's one of our hopes with finishing Stacey's fight, is if somehow this does reach that person, and I have no idea who he is, but if fate should get this in front of him, if he would give Detective Bessinger a chance to win his trust, he might know something. He might have seen something, and the police just wouldn't let him tell them because they were so convinced he was the guy. The time has proven that he was innocent. He had nothing to do with this.
Once a person gets a lawyer when being questioned by law enforcement is then forced to look for every little bit of evidence and talk to everyone possible to have a reason to question a person after they get a lawyer. Hey true crime fans, if you like Just In Case You Forgot, you will also want to check out Murderers in Ohio on YouTube. Murderers in Ohio is about men and women who have been convicted of murder in the state of Ohio. And it is hosted by myself, Bill Swafford. So go to Murderers in Ohio on YouTube and subscribe now.
So we got a killer on a run in Ohio.
Questions in the investigation into Stacey's missing person investigation continue to go unanswered. One detective did take a long shot at finding Stacey in October of 1998. Columbus Division of Police divers were doing a routine dive at Antrim Lake. Antrim Lake is on the northwest part of Columbus, near State Route 315. It was the divers' last practice of the year. It was stated that it was the detectives' belief that it might be beneficial to the investigation to use the divers' last practice of the year to search the lake for Stacey Colbert. That same detective also stated that there was no reason to believe that Stacey would be in the lake. Their search ended with no results. I asked Danielle how she felt the investigation was handled when it was in the hands of Columbus detectives.
So there were 3 different detectives on there, a husband and wife, Amy and Dave Morris, Detective Morris's, and Detective Pat Barr, and they both had 2 different suspects that they were interested in. And so I think when you have division, that it makes it really difficult to really go gangbusters, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that they were professional and they were incredibly nice. But I feel like because of the division, we probably aren't as far as we probably need to be. That we really didn't start to make progress until it became a cold case, until her remains were found, which was 7 years of just complete and utter horror for us.
It was stated that in the year of 1998 that 498 missing person cases were filed in the city of Columbus. I come from a small town in a small county in southern Ohio. So when I heard 498 cases were filed in 1 year in one city area, it seemed like a lot to me for one city. I have not been able to talk to anyone who worked this investigation in Franklin County, so I cannot comment on how they deal with the missing person cases or how many detectives were available to work 498 cases in 1 year. Stacey had gone missing in March of 1998, the early part of the year. I could not help but wonder if Stacey's investigation got the full attention that it needed. To clarify, I'm not wondering if Stacey's case was put off to the side intentionally. There's just a question on whether or not the detectives could handle 498 cases in 1 year, and how much help did they receive. I asked Danielle how she felt about that.
I'm not so sure. I mean, it's hard from the family perspective to know that, because they did reach out. My dad was calling them. My uncle was calling them. I think it would have, there were a lot. There definitely were a lot of cases that year for sure.
Yes.
But it's hard to say. We were definitely they were talking to us, talking to my dad, talking to me. Did they give up because they wanted to focus on the other ones? I can't answer that.
I asked the same question to the sorority sisters of Stacey. This is what Katie had to say.
It's possible. I know that the Columbus police, the homicide detectives were working on it seemingly a lot, at least initially, over the first few weeks. I don't know if after nothing panned out, or nothing that I know of panned out from, her apartment, from the crime lab taking samples there, maybe they felt like there was nothing else they could do. I want to believe that they interviewed people. I know they tried to interview some people who refused to be interviewed. As far as I know, they were working on it, but I take your point about how they have such a high caseload that when they get through all the basic stuff that they need to do to try to solve it, and it's still not solved, do they just kind of sit on it?
Here is Paula, and she mentions that it seemed like whenever there was a new missing person case in Columbus, it was usually the same detectives on the case.
I do think the police were overwhelmed. I do know that I did call the female detective on the case once with a lead that I'm pretty confident she didn't follow up on. Now, maybe it was something that was already ruled out. I don't know, because she never called me back. I do think they were pretty overwhelmed. And I feel like every time there was a homicide in Columbus or a missing person, it was always kind of the same 3 detectives on the case. I do think they were very overwhelmed.
This was Ashley's opinion.
It's hard to say, looking back now, thinking, going through the notes and things like that, it's hard to say if they messed up or not, or gave it their best. Certainly every time that I talked to them, they seemed engaged and told us, what we were doing was good and helpful. There's also, most people at that time agreed to take a polygraph test. And there were 2 suspects that lawyered up and refused. And so, if that's.
It's hard to comment on how the investigation was handled. All people knew was that the days kept going on. No one heard from or seen Stacey, and unanswered questions kept stacking up. A question that I have at this point: was the people in the apartment building questioned about any unfamiliar vehicles in the parking area around the days of March 21st through the 22nd of 1998? I want to know more about the area of the Governor Square apartment complex. My knowledge of Columbus is very limited. I've been to Columbus for an Ohio State game and a couple of Ohio State 4-mile marathons, so I need to know more about where Stacey's apartment was. The Governor Square complex is on the northwest part of Columbus, north of the university campus. The building that Stacey's apartment is in looks to be about the middle of the complex, and it's a good-sized complex. There is one street that ties into the parking area of Stacey's building. That street name is Bunker Hill Boulevard, which runs basically west to east. A person would have to take Kinney Road, which runs north to south, to turn on Bunker Hill. I asked Paula if she could describe the outside of Stacey's apartment.
It was really simple. I had actually lived in Governor Square about a year before she did, in a different style apartment. I lived in the back in the townhouse where she lived. That area at the time, it was called Two-Lawn or Two-Lane, something like that. And it was kind of a European feel to those apartments. And I believe her apartment only had maybe 2 to 3 windows. One of them was in her bedroom. I think there was one off of her kitchen, and then one that faced the parking lot. I was part of the group that moved her belongings out of that apartment. And I remember one of the things that I noticed about her front door was there was no window around it anywhere, not even so much as a peephole. And they're still this way, which it pisses me off. But the only way you could know who was on the other side of the door was to open it or to speak and hope that they spoke back. But there was no way to see without opening her door.
There is a wide age range of people that could have been at the Governor Square apartment complex, like college students, recent graduates, and some people who could have been in their 30s or 40s. Stacey was a victim of another crime that happened there at the Governor Square apartment complex. Paula had mentioned something about Stacey's checks being stolen from her mailbox.
Even when she had her checks stolen out of her mailbox at that apartment. And those people kept cashing them, and she was getting calls even after she went missing. I think finally the Columbus police went to the Kroger where these people kept using her checks and said, look, she filed a police report about this months ago. She's all over the news. Like, you guys need to stop. But she trusted everybody.
I had asked several of the people that I had talked to if Stacey had liked her apartment at Governor Square and whether or not she had any problems with any of the neighbors. I got the same basic answer from each one. They felt like she liked her apartment and Stacey had never talked about any problems with any neighbors. I asked Ashley if Stacey had ever had any problems with anyone that she knew of.
I mean, there was definitely, we were in college, we would, go out with people and, come up with nicknames for people. There was certainly some people within the Greek system that, we were like, oh, check out this person. But it was, nothing that she was having like a real, conflict with or anything too serious, I would say.
The more I work on this podcast, the more I believe that this investigation is going to come down to someone talking. Someone has to know something that would help out law enforcement with their investigation into the death of Stacey Colbert.
It makes me so sad that people don't want to get involved. And that whole mentality of like, I don't want to get involved, I don't want to deal with it. I mean, that's probably one of the main reasons too that this case is still open, because people are just like, I just don't know, I'm not sure, I don't want to get involved, I don't want to deal with it, things like that. I know there is someone out there that's got some type of connection. They know of an acquaintance, or they know someone was an acquaintance of Stacey's, and there's something that just wasn't right about that situation, or something they had a bad feeling about. But then they go down that path of, well, I don't want to get involved. Maybe I don't know enough. Maybe in that self-doubt or just selfishness of like not wanting to participate in the situation. If people would just like remove that and just think about the person. Think about, even if you didn't know that person, I mean, that was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's best friend. Like, why wouldn't you want to help solve that case and get that person behind bars? That person is out there today. Once you flip that switch on to killing someone, that type of light switch does not get turned off. I guarantee whoever that person that did it is not most likely, has committed other acts of violence against women. And that's when silence on these situations can be deadly for women.
A few months after Stacey had been reported missing, her employer, AEP Electric Company, offered $10,000 for any information that could lead to an arrest and finding Stacey. Crime Stoppers had put up a $1,000 reward for any information on Stacey's investigation. This is the timeline that I am seeing at this time. Friday, March 20th, Stacey goes out in the evening with a friend to Arlington Cafe. A man takes Stacey home and nobody knows who the man was. On March 21st, Stacey talks on the phone with her dad and has food delivered to the apartment around 6 in the evening. In the early morning hours of March 22nd, people in the apartment above Stacey's heard screaming and loud banging noises. A man from that apartment knocked on Stacey's door in the afternoon to check on Stacey, but received no answer. March 23rd to 24th, Stacey did not report to work at AEP. Then on March 24th, Danielle, Stacey's sister, had gone over to the apartment to find that Stacey was not there, and that was the day Stacey Colbert was reported missing to police. 3 days after Stacey had been reported missing, the case started to be handled like a homicide investigation after law enforcement carefully gone through Stacey's apartment. The fact that the investigation was being handled like a homicide investigation before locating Stacey lets me know that something happened inside of that apartment. Law enforcement took a piece of carpet, some pictures of the apartment, and some of Stacey's stuff, like her bedding. So what was it that the detectives were keeping to themselves? We'll talk more about Stacey's apartment in the next episode.
Do you remember the very last time that you talked to Stacey and what it was about?
I think the last time that I talked to her was last time that I saw her at least was in early 1998, and it actually was that we ran into each other at the Tuttle Mall. I happened to be going to get something, and she was, running somewhere from work, and she seemed great. Like, she was just loving, having her first job and being out there in her career. And we were just happy to see each other, and we said that we would get together soon. And I think one of the things that bums me out is a few weeks before she died, she and one of our other friends got together, and I felt like I had too much studying to do, so I didn't go. And, I'll always regret that. And it's funny that it's ironic that I feel guilty, like I should have been there for her somehow, and if I could stop what happened to her, and I shouldn't have been so busy, and should I have picked up on something? And I guess on some level I still feel that way, like a bad friend. And it's just kind of ironic that somebody kills her and walks away guilt-free potentially, and then all the rest of us have guilt around not being able to protect her, and just not, we just thought we'd have more time with her.
On the next episode of Just In Case You Forgot, I will talk to Danielle and Stacey's sorority sisters about how they packed up Stacey's apartment and how it looked when they first walked inside.
Did you see any footprint on the door?
Absolutely. All of us saw it.
Now.
And the handprints in front of the door on the floor.
I remember, we were at Governor Square. We were helping her sister move stuff out of her apartment, and just being there. The law enforcement was there. I remember sitting in the police car, and they were asking me, do you recognize this name? Do you recognize that name? Does this person look familiar? And just I didn't recognize the names, and just being so overwhelmed and numb and surreal.
Then eventually I will get to the conversation that I had with the detective who is now working on the investigation into Stacey's death.
My name is Jeff Bessinger, and I am currently a sergeant with the Delaware County Sheriff's Office when a hunter looking for his lost hunting dog located a skull in the woods. That started the investigation for Delaware County.
Please remember, this is still an ongoing homicide investigation. If you have any information on this investigation, please contact the Delaware County Sheriff's Department in Ohio.
Just In Case You Forgot podcast is produced and hosted by William Swafford. Music was put together by William Swafford.